Thank you very much, Helena and Shandi, for joining me today for this discussion on the BiblioSophia channel about your brand new book, The Serpent Ikons. Before we get into the meat of the book, I'd like to have each of you tell me a little bit about yourselves. How did you first get into the occult?
I'll let you begin, Helena.
Thank you. All right. So the the first thing that I did really that resonated with the occult was when I was 11. I got my hands on Aleister Crowley's Book of the Law and gobbled it up and have never looked back, frankly.
That is a serious starting point.
Yeah, I know. And I had been reading some astrology before then. But honestly, I didn't understand any of it at all, but something pulled me in. Anyway, so fast forward and what was important to me as I was growing up, as I was a teenager, was always this, what I can now identify as, as meaningful, existential meaningfulness. That's really what it was about. And to the point where I ended up doing a bachelor's in religious studies because I was pretty serious about this question. However, in doing that, I realized how much I despised organized religion, like to the core of my being, and not to say that there is never anything good about it. Simply speaking for myself, the idea of, authoritarianism and patriarchy and dogma and all of that just did not do well. Anyway, so that was a fantastic thing to do, though. Absolutely no regrets. It was terrific. But what it did, though, was it pushed me more and more to look elsewhere for answers, if there are any, to these questions of existential meaning. Meanwhile, I'm continuing to work with astrology, to work with tarot. I eventually got certified as an astrologer with a Canadian organization, and always practicing and always working, and it's been a core of my being for my entire life, basically. Alongside that, yes, I did have a professional life and a personal life. So I'm a professional in the field of conflict resolution. I've written several books. I'm a mediator. I'm a university professor in that field. So I've had a lot of human interaction, a lot of interaction with people at their most sensitive and vulnerable and scared. And that, believe it or not, has lent a lot to my occult practice and to who I am as an occultist. But that's another story. So that's just a little bit about my journey.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You just reaffirmed my idea of why I didn't want to go into that, because on a university level, I was, I think, if some people can get into the right schools with the right teachers that can really dig deeper into their esoteric and occult studies, but then some other people are just like, yeah, this is not what I wanted here.
Yeah, right. And that digging deeper, then it comes down to, so are people claiming truth, capital T, because if they do, run. Mm-hmm. Yeah, run. We're working with hypotheses here. That's all we're working with. There's no user's guide. There's no user's manual.
Yeah, well, the thing should really be about exploring the universe, not about solidifying it. Right.
Such a great point. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, Shandi, how about you?
How do I get into the occult? It was always there. I grew up in a family where tarot was always here. My mother always had a tarot, so the tarot of Marseille, and so we always kind of use it, but not as a divinatory tool, more as a psychological or archetypal tool to figure it out, some trouble, psychological troubles or stuff like that, to get into conversation too. And my father is a Zen Buddhist for now, I don't know, 20, 25 years, I don't remember. But always have been into the spirituality, Indian spirituality, and many other stuff. So I was always surrounded by that field of spirituality, symbols, tarot. And then, like, naturally, when I grew up, I went into the magic. So I began as many with Wicca. That wasn't too obvious in France at that time, because it was not like in US, like a real brand and stuff. It wasn't not that. So, and then I moved into the occult and learned by myself many stuff. And also I get interested into the healers, like folk healers in France. So I get close to them too, and I learn that. And so my way is around all this. And about 15 years ago, I met an Indian guy, a master of Srividya, and he took me as disciple, if I can say that. And I spent some time with him too. So I have some training, if I can say that, because I don't really put it on the front. And yeah, I can, yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, it sounds like you guys both, for different reasons, got into this at a very early age. That's really cool, Shandi, that you're, on your mother's side, you have the tarot that's being worked with, and then on your father's side, you have the Zen Buddhism. That's a really rich environment to sprout your own wings. And Helena, for you to start with the Aleister Crowley's Book of the Law, that's like
Right.
that's just jumping straight into the deep end. Yeah, when I was 13, I was messing around with Gardner's the big, like, introduction to Wicca book was my sort of like tap sort of taking my first little footsteps into the whole topic on my own. So I guess maybe that was slightly similar to your experience, Shandi. So then when did you guys both decide that you wanted to follow your own path and not stick to any, you sort of alluded to this, Helena, and you didn't like the standard religions and all of the guidelines, and Shandi, you were saying that you sort of worked with a guru within Hinduism, within Sri Vidya, and then decided that I guess that wasn't for you. So what led you guys both to really start making your own path forward? Maybe Helena, go first.
Sure. Honestly, it was the human beings. Seriously, I'm really awkward in groups and in social settings. I'm fine, if it's teaching or if it's professional or business, but when we're getting into the meat of what existence is about and the sacredness of our lives, that's pretty vulnerable territory. And what I found for the forays that I did go into, one that was psychologically traumatizing. Here's what I found. So for people who are running groups or leadership in groups, or maybe it's a council or a committee or whatever, how much knowledge and information and experience they have on the magical side of things and occult side of things, that's not something that's, I ever questioned. But how much do they know about really good leadership? How much do they know? What are their interpersonal skills like? What are their communication skills like? What are their conflict resolution skills like? What about emotional intelligence? What about being trauma informed? Because we know that many people who are in the occult are there very often, you know, with reasons of looking for an answer that will help them to work through some trauma that they've experienced. That's not at all unusual. So really it was about, you know, as much as I wanted to be in a group, it was about looking at leadership and how did they measure up against these things. So not the magical stuff or the occult stuff. And I
Yeah.
really, yeah, I found that lacking. And you know, I think we've all seen, you know, these groups implode one after the other. You know, many groups do. Those that don't, there's always a fair amount of conflict and drama. Some of it makes its way into social media, some of it doesn't. And I just don't want any of that stuff because I do it for a living. So the last thing that I want is in my, you know, in my spiritual practice, which isn't separate from my personal private practice, sorry, my professional practice, but it's still sacred. And that really is what pushed me to go quote unquote solo, because I just find that I just didn't fit anywhere.
Yeah,
I
well,
tried.
that's an astute observation. That's a lot of those groups. I mean, you know, half of it's in Netflix documentaries at this point.
Yeah, exactly.
True.
Yeah.
So, and how about you, Shandi?
I think it's mixed with many things. Like Helena, I don't really get along with group. It's kind of difficult. There is also the part of the artistic part here. So the vision, I can say, doesn't fit always with the global vision of a group or an organized group religion. And also for my background, you know, I'm not baptized. I didn't fit into this Christianity field and way of thinking life. I have Indian origin, yes, but at the same time, I don't speak a word of Sanskrit, so to say. And I'm not a Jew, so I'm not really I don't rely really to Kabbalah neither. So all this that is a substract of Western occultism was kind of always a problem. So the only way into this is do your own. So that's what I did. And it's like with my art, I do my thing. That's that. Yeah, that's why.
Yeah,
I
that
tried.
makes a
I
lot of
really
sense.
tried to go into groups too, but it didn't end well.
Yeah,
I mean,
well, it's
not
different for
bad,
everybody.
but it is. I just don't fit into it. I just don't find what I was looking for.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's definitely, it's to each person their own how they have to work their way through these kinds of things. You know, some people are going to really be seeking out that group dynamic, and other people are going to be really more interested in working on their own. And then like Helena was saying, then you take the situation of everybody's individual psychology all clashing together in a group setting. Some groups that might all fit together perfectly, but for a lot of groups it's just an absolute chaos waiting to happen that will slowly unfold. So I was wondering, Shandi already spoke a little bit about how he first got into tarot. Yeah, well, I guess how he at least first encountered it. Maybe he'll have a little bit more to say about his first direct experience with it, but then maybe Helena will start with you since you hadn't really mentioned this topic yet. What was your first encounter with tarot?
That was I just you know, along the way you hear about tarot. Obviously, it's such an important tool to use on so many levels. So I think it was. I think it was the Rider-Waite deck. I think that was my first deck that I picked up. You know, kind of classic.
Yeah.
And I got. You know, I took a couple of lessons. But what I liked about it was that if you look at it this way, like humans are on a space-time continuum, right? We're born, we die, and everything happens in between. Okay. And so with tarot as a tool, what I found was that as I started to practice with it, it helped me to hover above this space-time continuum so that suddenly I could potentially get information, you know, from my own subconscious, of course, but also looking at previous events or potentially future events, information that was previously not available to me, was something that seemed to be happening with tarot, and sometimes not even on this space-time continuum from my life, but sometimes others, you know, other people and so on. So I found that it was a really interesting way to develop, bottom line, my own intuition, and my own, you know, kind of like a psychic antenna.
Yeah.
And that's what, yeah, that's what I really loved about it. I've never used tarot like with a spread, like the Celtic Cross spread or the I don't use that way at all. In fact, how I use it, and I think how Shandi uses it as well, is described in the book, but really relies very strongly on honing your own psychic antenna and your own intuition. So that's pretty much, you know, tarot for me.
Yeah, that's a very intuitive way of going about it. And yeah, so I guess it sounds like you've been following that path from the beginning. It was different for me, you know, with my first experience. Well, the same deck as you, but yeah, I took the book and I just laid the cards out how they told me to, and then I read what the piece of paper told me. So yeah,
Yeah.
mine was the exact opposite of intuitive. I just followed the directions.
No, but it's important. I think it's important to do that because, I mean, of course, I did that at the beginning too, right? But then you have something to contrast against later when if you really start to work with it as a tool, then you
Yeah.
can do that anyway. But I ended up with the go-to deck was the Thoth deck. The Rider-Waite was the start, but it ended up with the Thoth deck.
Yes, I love the Thoth deck.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's a
Okay,
beautiful
and
deck.
yes, it's beautiful. And for me, the results that I got from it were much more profound than anything that I got from the Rider-Waite deck personally. So I'm glad you mentioned the Thoth deck. I do love that deck.
Awesome.
Yeah, and so is there anything else that well, you sort of touched on it a little bit, Shandi, but would you like to add anything to sort of what your first experiences were with tarot?
The first experience, yes, was with my mother. But in fact, after that, I didn't use tarot anymore. I tried many oracles, and I end up to draw mine. That was the first deck that I built, and I tried to make a tarot at that time too, but I didn't have the knowledge necessary, and I felt that the tarot was so brutal, so immense, so too much symbols, too much knowledge into it to draw it. So I didn't do it, and I never used it until the Serpent Ikons that I reconnect with the Tarot Marseille. But yeah, I mainly use my own oracle, except for now. But yes, but I always read on the subject, on the tarot, because it's so beautiful. It's a very beautiful tool, a very powerful tool, and give a lot of
Yeah,
information.
yeah, that's what's brought me back to it also over the years is just the sheer beauty of you know, it's sort of a shallow thing to say, but I really just love the aesthetic of tarot cards. And it was like every time that I put it down for a few years, it's like I really miss that, you know, even more so than the experience that I had with it. Just looking at the cards was so enjoyable to me. Shandi, you said that you were sort of working a little bit on a deck. Was that like, were you the most, I guess, focused on your illustrations of that at the time?
Yeah, at that time it was more about the illustration and trying to do it, but I realized that the tarot, it's so rich, there is so many aspects in it that is, if you don't, I didn't feel that I have the knowledge enough to really do something. So
yeah, well, I mean, that's cool that you had a bit of an experience with that process before you started on this, though. Even if it, you know, arguably didn't lead anywhere, it at least was a very nice foundation, I'm sure, for when you came back to this one. You already had found out what didn't work for you in the past. And I would imagine that the two of you working together really helped that to be a much richer process this time, and generally more fulfilling for the both of you.
That was fun.
Yeah, that was so nice.
Yeah, we had and are having such a great time working together.
Yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, I wanted to ask, you know, we're already on the topic. I'm assuming you guys are friends outside of collaborating on this together, and how long have you known each other?
Forever.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. That's good enough. Well, yeah, I don't need an exact year, but no, it's not like you met like last year or something. So
well, pretty close though, actually. You know, it is funny how it started off. We actually didn't meet each other physically for at least a year, maybe longer, before we started working together. So, you know, what happened was that we were friends on Facebook, and we, of course, you know, Gabriel in common and Anathema, and I was seeing him post his art, which was the Serpent Ikons art, and it really moved me, and I loved it, and made me uncomfortable, and you know, it sort of brought up a whole bunch of emotions. So so I had the idea one day that this should be a book to go with the art, and a collaboration. So yeah, threw that out to him, and
the rest is history. Yeah.
Yeah, but because it was the pandemic, that's the funny thing, right? Because this was at the very beginning, right? I think at the very beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah, very beginning of the pandemic, yes.
So yeah, we never actually met each other until in person until, was it last year? Last summer? I can't remember. Anyway, yeah. It was at some point last summer. So
yeah, well, that's what we were saying before we started here. You know, this new digital age, you can really get to know a person without ever being within 1,000 miles of them, and that's so strange, but it's absolutely true.
That's exactly.
We end up to have endless conversations on occult, tarot, and so many other subjects. So yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, just a fantastic connection. And you know, I'm an astrologer, right? So of course, one of the first things I did was I asked for his birth data so I could do a natal chart. You know, let's see. And much to my absolute delight, you know, he has his moon is 26 degrees of Gemini, and so is mine. And when you do the math, like that sort of thing happening is not very common. It's mathematically a pretty big swing that you're going to meet somebody that has that significant of a connection from an astrological perspective. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah, well, I'm not I'm not that knowledgeable on astrology, but I would assume that just from a general numbers perspective, the both of you having that Gemini aspect together is interesting. But then the fact that Gemini is, you know, the twins, so it's sort of the two working together.
Yeah,
so yeah,
exactly.
That seems like it has a bit more of a bit more to it. So yeah, that's really cool. So Gary Lockman, who wrote a definitive biography on British philosopher and author Colin Wilson, has written the foreword to the Serpent Ikons. And in the introduction, you mentioned that this book could not have been written without the influence of Colin Wilson. What is the link between Colin Wilson and the Serpent Ikons text?
Well, I'll take that one. First of all, I want to start off. If Gary, if you're listening, thank you again so much. What an immense gesture of support from him towards us, and yeah, so deeply thankful for that. And Gary, of course, who has written one of the definitive biographies on Colin Wilson, has, I don't know how many 30s, somewhere in the 30s, books written himself. So the link there is that he knew Colin Wilson. He's, has an immense expertise in Colin Wilson. And Colin Wilson was one of my very earliest influences. As I think I was around 20. And it was a massive influence because his book, The Outsiders, that started things off, 1950s, I believe. Anyway, so he's exploring meaning, existential meaning, and consciousness, and he develops something called new existentialism, right? So he's rejecting the idea of the existentialists that there's, he believes that life does have meaning. and in fact, he thinks that human beings, although we use the term human, we don't know what it is yet, because we're not there yet. We have not developed our full potential in any way that you can think of. And I guess we can say, well, there's positive and negative to that, as we see every day. But his approach is much more positive, and he's basically saying, look, if you're exploring your own meaning and your own consciousness, and you're continually building it up, and with intentionality, and that's an expression that I'm using from a philosophical perspective, we won't go into it now, but and phenomenology, and something that he called faculty X. So all of these things, to me, were incredibly nourishing. That was the food I was looking for, that the religions couldn't possibly provide. And then when I started to explore occult groups, some stuff started to sound very familiar. And I think if we're looking at, let's say, the Church of Satan and the Temple of Set, and the various Luciferian organizations and Lilith and so on, they're all what we're going to generally lump under left-hand path, right? Mm-hmm. Not the left-hand path of the Sanskrit of Vamachara, we're not talking about the same thing at all here, or the Vama Marga, not even Blavatsky, right? Who also used that term. We're talking really modern, that took off in the 1970s, right? However, the things that I'm talking about, that I mentioned about Colin Wilson, so the meaning and consciousness, the becoming of the human, intentionality and phenomenology and faculty X, I noticed that, a lot of that's being talked about in these left-hand path groups. So, I wonder who came up with it first. Yeah. Well, it was Colin Wilson who came up with it first. And interesting, when you add a god to it, or god figure or archetype, such as Satan or Lucifer or Set or Lilith, then mix in some magical systems and prowess and so on, suddenly you've got a left-hand path magical group thing going. So for me, the reason why we took a chapter specifically to say we are not claiming that this is left-hand path is because if we look at it from the philosophical perspective of Colin Wilson's new existentialism, it's all there. It's already all there, minus the leader stuff that I talked about earlier that's typically missing. Yeah. And the authoritarianism and the patriarchy and the in-groups and all of that stuff is not there. And none of the cultural appropriation that comes with, choosing a patron god that is, someone or something that is guiding your group.
Yeah,
So that
absolutely.
doesn't, yeah. So that, I mean, to me, that's the link. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not magicians. Like, you can't be a magician if you're not somewhere on the left-hand path or right-hand path. No, totally not. There is such a thing as magic and mystery, and we, Shandi and I do it all the time, and we practice together, and it's embedded in the Serpent Ikons, but not as a known entity, group, or path. So we're trying to encourage people to look at it from the philosophical perspective, and by all means, go out and read at least Colin Wilson's Introduction to New Existentialism, and you'll see what I mean. If you want to talk about left-hand path, it's all there. It's all written out, minus the trappings that come with it in occult roots.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, well, thank you very much for explaining that.
Mm-hmm.
So in the introduction, you explained that the Serpent Icon should be considered on 3 levels: art, the text, and real-life esoteric practice, and that these 3 elements don't necessarily need to be equally embraced for any given practitioner or their reading. Could you explain this basic concept a little bit further?
Want to have a crack at it, Shandi?
I think what we want to say, it's in the book, the art and the text are 2 ways of meaning. The art doesn't illustrate the text, and the text doesn't illustrate the art. And the practice is something that involves the 2, so the art and the text and the practice. Also, the art speak on a maybe more poetical or symbolic level. The text speak more maybe on the mental and thought philosophical level, and the practice itself is the practice of it, and the practice level, like the action of it. So that's what we really want to do with this 3 parts. And also we really want to make them complementary completely, like something that have to be worked together, instead of having just a card, just a text, or just practice. It's something that came all together. But indeed, you are not supposed to master everything in life anyway. We don't have time. So yeah, that's what I would say. I don't know if you have something to add, Helena.
Yeah, I think what you've already said. It just that we wanted to make sure that this was not formulaic, So I remember, Michael, what you were talking about earlier. Like, we get that first Rider-Waite deck, and you've got your images, and then you've got the little text in the booklet that explains what the image is, and then how to use it. Well, we didn't want to do that. So the art stands alone, right? So you can go with the art and into whatever journey you go into. The same thing with the text. They don't need each other. They don't explain each other, but they're there to complement each other and try and you pull out the best in each of them in a sense. And from yeah, you already said it, Shandi, like from a magical perspective, that we're serious practitioners, so we do magic. So we created a ritual for each of the cards, or working, if we want to call it that, which we won't get into all of the detail now, but so that it's not just the armchair stuff, right? There's nothing wrong with armchair, but if you want to do practice, then we have the practice as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really awesome way of going about it. And yeah, I mean, quite unique to a lot of, if you look at the tarot section in any random store, and yeah, for the most part, there's a lot of decks, but there's not a lot of things explaining the decks. Or you have those certain few decks like the Rider-Waite and the Thoth deck, where it's like there's like 15 books on the topic, and then you have to pick and choose which author you want to follow their representation of that deck. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting way of putting it together, and it sort of would force a person like me to take it in a more personal direction than the other ones really sort of walk you into this is how you use this. This is exact, memorize this, do that, put this one here, that one there, that one there. And, you know, you're saying this is sort of it's very, very easy for it to become your own practice and not just me. It's for me to make it my own and not just take exactly what you guys are doing with it. So I really like that about it. And I think it's going to resonate for a lot of people.
Yeah, so the way to approach the Serpent Icon is also the fact, as you said, the people have to, the reader have to be involved into it, because there is no description of the image, for example, you know. So if you want to decipher the image, you have to be with the image, to meditate with it, and not just look at it merely, and the same for the text. So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So what is the role of one's daemon in the Serpent Icons?
Yeah, I think that what we're doing, and I know that we know that there are a lot of different, opinions and perspectives on what the daemon is. Okay. I mean, we can go back to Plato and what Damon said about the Plato. We saw Young, James Hillman. I mean, there's no lack of that. I think the way we're using the daemon is acknowledging that as a magician. Okay, we'll speak from that perspective, that there is this core that. Never mind the personality, never mind the social environments, never mind the job, the groups, all of that stuff. There's a core here that we're interacting with daily if we're active on developing who we are as magicians, as human beings on this pale blue dot. So what is this core? And we could go into all of the discussions about what's the I, capital I, but from a magical perspective, we are looking at the daemon as most certainly ourselves, but also that part of ourselves that is not not the personality, not the social group, not the et cetera, and potentially, because it's all a hypothesis, that part of the self that survives death. So if that thing exists, right, this core being, then how can we get to know it better, and how can we interact with it more, and is it able to help us in our magical journey? And that's how we're using the daemon in the Serpent Icons. So each of the rituals that have been written is in fact a ritual with your daemon. So you go off and you do a ritual with accompanying actions, which if we get into it later, we can talk about what we mean by that. But you're basically going on a journey to develop a certain part of yourself, or process a certain situation, or heal from something, or learn something. And you're doing this with your best friend, your daemon. And that's how we're using the daemon in the Serpent Icons.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, your best friend that sometimes can kick you in the ass.
Totally. That's right. It's not all roses. Sometimes it's roses on a coffin, though.
Yeah, there you go. So yeah, you guys have already touched on this a little bit, but if you want to take it a little bit deeper, what was the thinking behind having the art, an accompanying text, and a ritual for each of the icons?
I think we conceive what that we
Yeah.
conceive that the serpent icon as a journey. So, but not necessarily a linear journey. So you're not supposed to work and begin the workings with the first card, the first icon. You can pick each one, but still it's a journey. So that is the art is something that accompany you into that journey, the text too, and the rituals or the practice of it. And which each with the ritual, so there is the ritual part, the ceremonial part, you can say that. And then we have some actions that accompany the that follow, in fact, the ceremonial practice, and that are connected to the specific icons. So every icon is a step further into yourself and into your relationship with daemon.
Yeah,
Your daemon.
exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I
very
don't know if you have
interesting.
something else to add.
Maybe just that what we did with each of the rituals, you know, what we really want to do is have ourselves, because this is primarily, you know, self work, right? So it's not like, oh, we've got it all sewn up. You all need to do this. No. We are doing this work, and we have a long way to go. And so the what I'm referring to here about the steps or the actions, and what Shandi referred to, is that rather than doing a ritual involving, let's say, a god or a goddess or a demon or an angel or whatever, we are not involving any other entity except for our own selves and our daemons. So that's one thing. And then each of the rituals, you know, based on the art and based on the text, are about, they're samples. You don't have to do them. You can mix them up and create your own, obviously, but each of them are giving an example of how do you develop this certain part in yourself, or heal this certain thing, or deal with that certain situation. And what we've added is 3 actions that you take after you've done your ritual. So basically it's like your part. So your daemon's gonna, you know, kind of gonna go off and influence where you cannot reach, kind of thing. But you have work that you can do. And so the 3 actions that we have are based in something cognitive, something emotional, and then something integrative. And so that, I think, is an unusual piece. We hope it's unusual. That you know, I've never seen anything in any of the magical and occult books that I've read. I don't know if you have, Shandi. I don't think so. Where, yeah, what's your part? What's your plan for your part? And then go and do it. And do it cognitively, emotionally, and then something to integrate the two. So that, yeah, that's just a little something I would add.
Yeah, and I think that many, I mean, today at least, we are seeing some that lake in magic. Magic doesn't work by itself. You have to do your work. You have to do your part, and that's what we encourage in that book, is that the magician have to do his part to make the magic happen. Otherwise, it's just a gambling.
Yeah, just to add something from Christianity, God helps those who help themselves. That was the one thing that I love from that religion. That always resonated with me. Like,
so
just don't say, "Please do this for me." No, get up and do it.
Yeah. And there's an Epicurus, the Greek philosopher, saying, I'm not going to get this exactly, but he basically says, you know, why on earth are you asking the gods to do something that you can do yourself?
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
That's
like,
that's
what are you
always been the
doing?
thing that's resonated with me the most. Like this will help you, but it's not going to replace you doing your work.
Right.
So
You know, and there's something else there too that Shandi and I have talked about exhaustively, and in fact, it's going to show up in one of our future books, and that is that, you know, when we're summoning gods and goddesses and angels, demons, or whatever, do we really know what we are summoning? You know,
yeah.
like, I'm not saying we're imagining it all and nothing is being summoned. I'm not saying that. We're not saying that. We're also not saying it doesn't work, because we've seen it work. But there is a big question there. All of these gods and goddesses and angels and demons and, you know, all these figures are steeped in culture and history that we have no clue about.
Yeah, like basically just because we gave it a name and put it in a category doesn't mean that we did it correctly.
For sure. Yeah, anyway. So that was another piece too. Yeah, I won't go into it. Don't let me go into it.
Yeah, cool. So why did you choose to have a quote of Anne Frank for the text of the last card of the Serpent Icons?
Yeah. So the last card of the Serpent Icons, you know, of course, we're not following strictly the Tableau de Marseille major arcana, but you know, there's some linkages there very clearly. So the last card is the World in the Serpent Icons deck. And for all of the other cards, I had written an accompanying text. But for this one, I decided to do a quote instead. So the quote is from Anne Frank, and on a personal level, that was like a nod, an acknowledgement to my own Dutch and Jewish heritage. But the quote is this: "How wonderful it is that nobody need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world." And you know, we put that in there, and I wanted to put that in there because that quote, of course, as we know, was written when she was in hiding, right, in Amsterdam, and full of hope, full of hope that this horror was going to end, and you know, we're going to be okay, and then we can start to improve the world. But we know what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, it was a way of asking the reader the question, how are you going to live your life? Because in a way, we don't know what's going to happen, right? We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, or 10 years from now, or whatever. So do we give it our best effort? And what does that look like? And why are we doing it? Or what? What's the alternative? And so then that's kind of a link back to Colin Wilson, who's like, yeah, existentialism, but new existentialism, because life isn't meaningless. And we haven't reached our full potential. And we can become what humans, all of the good things that human beings can, all of the positive things that human beings can become, that would make, if we did this, we would live in paradise right this freaking second, wouldn't we? Right? Like we would have a healthy planet. There would be no homelessness, no poverty. Like if we were doing our best potential, we would be living in paradise.
We could fix things so
right
easily
away.
if we wanted to.
Oh, totally, totally. So here's Anne Frank in hiding during the Holocaust. And she writes this, and I'm like, wow, that's like skittering on the edge of an existential crisis for me. Because all we have to do is take that and apply it and apply it and apply it and realize that we have a decision to make.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really powerful.
Yeah, what is this life going to be about? And how is it going to be? And we don't have to, not all of us, but some people are making, decisions like this in unbelievably horrific circumstances. But the chances are that somebody who can buy an Anathema book and read it is not going to be not needing to make a decision like this in the context that she did.
Yeah, not now at least. You never know if,
Oh, I
these
know.
these cards are going to sit on people's shelves for years, and there might be a day that comes along that somebody might be sitting there staring at that card thinking,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's exactly right, Michael. And that's kind of that's the train of thought, right? That you don't know.
Yeah, that's really powerful.
So that was the thinking behind putting her quote there.
Yeah, well, yeah, wow. So, you guys had a lot of emphasis on the magical practice using the icons and less on using them for divination. What is the reason for this?
The reason for this is there is so many books already on it. There is so many, as we know already, shelf on esoteric shops are full of tarot everywhere. So you can find many ways to do spread or don't do it, or find divination books with tarot and cards and whatever. But what we make the emphasis on the level of divination for that part of the question is the fact that we talk about divination, but more like how to ask a question. What's your intention in the question? How to properly ask a question? Because maybe Helena, maybe I'm sure Helena, and me too. We are readers, and we are confronted to that with people. They don't know to ask a question. They ask, should I do, or do I have to do this? Yes, but that you put your power in what? In the universe, into God, into the card, into me. That's not what we wanted. What we really wanted is to the person that has the question to have the power to have the answer, and then the cards, the icons will be an answer from that perspective, and not an answer of yes and no, or an answer that the universe, you should, yes, of course, you should go back to do that. So it's more a reflective way of divination, and how to ask the question, how to refine your purpose, and and also it come back to a time where divination was sacred. It was not a piece of you don't do that in the kitchen table and while you are cooking your cookies. I don't know, but you take time for it. You
have a bucket of blood.
Yeah, you have bucket of blood. So that's what we wanted to with the divination. We wanted to come back to something that was more a reflective aspect, and always connected to the self. That is the core of the book. And maybe also because divination is very important in magic, we know that, but the ritual emphasis is the emphasis on action. So if you want something, if you want to heal, if you want to do, again, do your part, work, and do the action, and maybe do the divination before, but in a good way, like in the proper way to have the good action. That's what we wanted to do with that, and not a divination tool for whatever question would be like, should I go to my vacation?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Well, we know the answer to that, to vacation. It's going to be a yes.
Yeah, we all should go to vacation, of course.
Absolutely.
But that's such a good point, though, Shandi, that like people ask questions about things they already know the answer. They're just afraid to call it, or there's something there that's blocking them. And so in that sense, I think tarot readings can be very, very powerful, because it creates some sort of space where it's okay to bring this out, you know. And so that's great. Why not? But yeah, like Shandi was saying, we don't, this is not divination for mundane issues, you know, like, should I take the vacation, the job, the this, the that? This is more about, you know, we're talking about the reader as a magician, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, what aspect of myself would help me in my magical practice if I developed it, or if I uncovered it, or, you know, so on and so forth. So these are the deep self questions that we're looking at divination from that perspective.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, I think you guys are really laying the focus on a personal reading, not you go to a tarot reader that will give you a reading, but this really needs to be something that you work with on your own. Is that correct in my guess there?
Completely, yes.
Yeah.
The icon are really made for the reader to find the answer by him herself, instead of having someone else to do that.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, and then that's what takes you into that direction of you can really work things out in your own head, because if somebody's just, you know, sort of giving you a reading, like, they don't really know what's going on in your head, but you do.
Right.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so do you guys have any plans for working together on any books or any other projects in the future? It seems like you haven't decided to start tearing each other's throats out after this project. You're still friends, you're still smiling with each other. That's a good sign, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, it could have gone really wrong, right? I mean, this is
True,
very...
that's good.
But it didn't. It didn't. It was beautiful, and it still is.
Yeah, completely. And speaking of projects, yes, we have many projects, in fact. But
Gemini moons, come on.
Gemini moon. But we have something that a little thing, you know, let's say that is coming with Exen Press in France. It's a set of 10 drawings accompanied with text. And after that, we have a book and maybe another book. But,
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's really great. Yeah, I mean, seriously, like after you get through the project of this variety with another person as a collaboration, it can really tell you whether you want to work together with somebody again or not. And if you do, that's a really, you know, strong reinforcement that you have a good collaboration there. So
Yeah.
I'm really glad to see that. And like, yeah, I mean, obviously you guys are really comfortable having this interview together, working with each other. So this has been a lot of fun for me. I hope it was fun for you guys to come on here and talk to people today.
Oh, totally. Thank you so much, Michael.
Yeah,
it was
you're
great,
welcome.
great to speak with you.
Yeah, and you know, at this point I've had a bit of a preview of the text, but I really can't wait to get the book and the cards in hand and really see what you guys have put together. So as I'm sure anybody that's going to see this interview is also thinking, like, we can't wait to get our hands on this. So and I know Gabriel cannot wait to get it to us.
Completely.
So yeah, thank you guys very much for being here today. Thank you to the BiblioSophia's viewers for checking out this interview. Anybody that's watching this, please subscribe, click the like button, click the notification button, and let them know in the comments how excited you are for this text and set of cards that will be coming along very soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Thanks.